Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 52, and the topic for today is good war movies are anti-war movies. You might hear some thunder in the background. There's a storm that just rolled in. Um, yeah, I can't ask them to reschedule. So here we go. Hollywood issues aside, right? They're currently going through a strike. And just as an aside, I think the strike is illustrating just how irrelevant they are. And now that we have streaming and all of these other platforms that we can watch things that were produced prior to all of this, you know, the current social and cultural and intellectual trends that we see today. And so I feel like they're going to destroy themselves. We can see that unions often sort of kill the host, as it were. Unions and the companies they work for, it should be a symbiotic kind of relationship. But if one demands too much of the other, it basically destroys it. And so I think that can be illustrated, easily seen by that truck company. I think Yellow is the name of the company. The workers just got so many perks and higher wages that it essentially bankrupted the company. Now, obviously, it's a little more complicated than that. In order to satisfy the union demands, it is said that they borrowed a lot of money, but of course they borrowed the money when the interest rates were low. So now that the interest rates are going up, a lot of their assets are just simply not worth as much. And so Yellow went bust. And apparently, and I heard that they had gotten a bailout from the government, something like $700 million or something like that. And they went bankrupt anyway, right? So government bailouts are always a sign that you might have a zombie company on your hand. And a zombie company basically is a company that should be dead, but is kept alive by government money, taxpayer money, right? Because we know that governments don't actually have any money because they don't make anything. They just insert themselves in our lives every day. All right. So anyway, Hollywood is probably, all of the actors and writers are probably going to do that to Hollywood, especially now with a pretty good movie productions coming out of different countries. I was even really surprised to see the quality and even the writing of some of these movies that are coming out of other countries. But anyway, so I feel like this is not a very good move on the part of the actors and the writers. So what do I mean by good war movies are anti-war movies? Well, we're not going to get into the technical issues. We're not going to talk about lighting, cinematography. I mean, as a casual viewer, lifelong viewer of movies, there are some certain styles that I can live with, certain styles that are distracting, certain styles that I just can't. I just have to turn off the movie. And then there are, of course, well done ones where you're not even really thinking about it. Also, we're not going to talk about factual history, like historical accuracy. Um, when you make a movie, there's always going to be some sort of artistic license taken with characters, their dialogue, unless of course you're Clint Eastwood and you've got a script. You don't change any of the dialogue, any of the lines in the movie, but otherwise, the only thing that's really distracting for me is when the equipment is wrong in a war movie, right? It's not period. So that just kind of is distracting for me, but that's because I know a little bit more than the average moviegoer. And so those kinds of things are sometimes a little bit distracting. But we're not going to get into any of that. We're just going to go into because other people may not be bothered by that at all. And so let's just cut to the chase and try to figure out, at least from my subjective point of view, what would make a good war movie. Now, when I was a kid, there was no cable and there were only a few channels on TV. I never was allowed to go see a movie. And so that was like, I think before I went to college, I only saw two movies. That was Star Wars back in like 78, 1978. And I think I saw a Scrooge movie, A Christmas Carol, when I was in the third grade with my class at school. But anyway, so the movies that I could see were sort of $1 million movies, and those were the movies that were broadcast at midnight or 11:30 around that time, and they would show two movies in a row, and I would stay up secretly to watch both movies. Also, they were Saturday afternoon, Saturday matinee movies that they would put on TV, and so sometimes I would catch a war movie that way. But if you didn't have a TV guide, it was really difficult to see it from start to finish. And so usually I would tune in the middle of the movie. And because of restrictions, I guess, the movies that you would see on TV, they were propaganda films from the 40s. After World War II, you weren't allowed to see dismemberment. You weren't allowed a lot of blood and gore. That kind of thing. And so I grew up thinking war was pretty clean, right? Even there was a movie, Tora, 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 which came out in 1970, I believe. And it was about the attack on Pearl Harbor. And there were lots of explosions and whatnot, but you didn't see a whole lot of blood. I remember my friend, he saw that movie and he was like, man, where was the victory at the end? You know, it just sort of left you feeling really bad at the end of the movie, which made me think, so war movies, if you're going to have a war movie, it's got to have some sort of happy ending, some sort of resolution, which didn't sort of depress you at the end. That's what I thought, right? Those were the thoughts. I was 10 years old at the time. But anyway, I always thought, because of those war movies, I always thought it would be kind of cool to be in a war, because of course I would be one of the guys that would survive. I would be a hero. Everyone would love me. Everyone else might die, but hey, I wouldn't, right? It was that kind of mentality. I was a little kid. I mean, what did I know? Then I saw Gallipoli. Gallipoli with Mel Gibson in it. It came out in 1981, but I remember I saw it a little bit later than that. And I was shocked, right? Because it was such a horrific war. You had men charging into machine guns. It was a war that it was a battle that took place in 1915, I believe, part of World War One, and it just was just so stupid, right? I remember thinking, wow, that, you know, if I ever have to go to war, I'm going to make sure that the strategy and the tactics are solid. Because it would suck if you were ordered to charge into machine guns without any kind of protection, no safety measure, nothing. Then, and then we'd see other movies, excuse me, and they were relative. I remember seeing Big Red One, saw snippets of A Bridge Too Far. And again, those movies really didn't seem to make it seem that war was all that bad. And then 1986 came Platoon, and things were very gritty, very little glory. There was backstabbing, you know, and those days too, racism was sort of a matter of fact. I went through a bunch of things, and so I always thought that being in the military, you'd be freed of all that stuff, right? Because we're all on the same side. Nope. And so you see what was happening in Vietnam, that it was, it was very gritty. It wasn't pretty at all. You had factions within the military too, among the fighting units. The way that they would treat certain people, newbies, because they would die so quickly, you didn't want to get to know them, that kind of thing. So it was kind of very depressing. And it was kind of shocking too, because up until that point, it was very difficult to even talk about Vietnam. I don't know, some of you might remember those days. But it was kind of taboo to talk about Vietnam for a very long time because that was the one that America lost, right? Even the TV show MASH, which is based on the movie MASH, MASH, was supposedly be about Korea, but if you watch it, it's more like Vietnam than it was about Korea. And it's kind of interesting that Platoon came out the same year that Top Gun came out, 1986. And Top Gun had the effect of everyone trying to join the Navy, because they wanted to be one of those jet jockeys, kind of interesting, that contrast there, because Platoon, the movie, just sort of threw a lot of cold water on the idea of going to war. Then came Full Metal Jacket in 1987. I didn't see it until much, much later. But I remember, when I watched that movie, it was just like, there's no point, right? So you go and you fight, but there's no point. You're just trying to survive, that kind of thing. And then more often than not, you don't. And then came a lot of movies. When I'm taking these in blocks and chunks, where camaraderie was the focus, right? So war has no point. On the battlefield, there are no politics. It's dirty. It sucks. And so the only person you got is the person next to you. So Saving Private Ryan came out in 1998, and then came Band of Brothers, and that shaped a lot of people's perception of war. They did show through the miniseries anyway, just how you can get disillusioned and confused, slip into confusion very, very quickly. It did show too that Saving Private Ryan and Band of Brothers, that there is no such thing as a clean war, right? It's never pretty. It's never heroic. It's never glory anywhere. Then I saw We Were Soldiers, Mel Gibson movie again. And it was a Vietnam movie, and it was rough. I mean, it was interesting because I think they cleaned it up language wise, so to have a wider viewing audience, I guess. But it was just so pointless. It was so senseless. And you also began to see how the enemy is not really this evil, sort of soulless monster, right? And that made me, and I always knew that because I read a lot, but they showed it in a movie, which was kind of really interesting. And then also through these movies, you begin to realize that there are a lot of incompetent officers, really bad officers, that will order you to your death. And I thought that was kind of interesting. Around that time, I had a student who was like a 30-year Army guy, and I think he did special forces. Anyway, he told me some stories. It was pretty crazy. But he also told me that the whole mythology of, maybe I shouldn't say it. Oh, well, no one's listening to this, for my grandkids anyway, so I'll say it. The whole idea of fragging, right? So if your officer is really incompetent, then having that accident at the battlefield, right? The heat of war, the fog of war, friendly fire, hostile fire, who knows? And you can get rid of your idiot officer, commander, by having an accident, a not so accidental accident. Anyway, so I thought that was kind of interesting, that there is the ability for lower ranking soldiers to push back against bad commanders or leaders or officers. But the lesson is that you want to have a good one. And then finally, I encountered a bunch of movies which I thought and shaped my opinion of what a good war movie should be. And I started getting this a long time ago, back when I was in high school, because I read so much, as I said, And some of the things that I read was so graphic, it made me realize that you never want to be in a war. And so when I saw Joyeux Noel, Joyeux, right? Merry Christmas in French, came out in 2005. I think I saw it a few years after that. And it was about the Christmas peace in World War One, right? So everyone's all jazzed about the war. And I think I talked about this movie before. Everyone's jazzed about the war. They go to fight the war. They think that they're going to roll over their enemy. And this is the attitude everywhere in Germany, England, France. So all excited. They join the war, and it turns into trench warfare. Very bloody, just absolutely horrible. And the first Christmas rolls around, and the German soldiers start to sing Christmas carols, which, of course, a lot of people in the British French lines, they recognize the songs. They started singing together. They had mass together. They ate together. They played soccer together. And then they stopped shooting at each other, right? So these people were, you were socialized to believe that they are these soulless, most evil, the world would be a better place without them kind of person. But if you actually met and talked with them, it didn't turn out to be true at all. And that's the lie, the propaganda that governments feed their people so that they are willing to go to faraway places, meet foreign people, and kill them, right? And I've never done it, obviously, but I can imagine to take someone else's life, it's a big thing. And you begin to see how it destroys people. That aspect is often never really discussed, how war, the things that you have to experience and see, it 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 really takes a toll on the people. More recently, I saw All Quiet on the Western Front, and one might even argue that it's the German version of Joyeux Noel. And so you have all these German young kids so eager to join the battle and take part in all the glory, right? Because you got to imagine your government doesn't want the regular citizens to know just how badly the war is going, just how brutal the war is. And so there's just a lot of propaganda, a lot of pumping up of how awesome it is to fight in a war because they're trying to get people to join. And so they go, and it is completely different. It is a nightmare of a nightmare. It is just beyond scary. It is beyond horrible. And then to see people blow up, to see people that you grew up with all of a sudden disappear in an explosion or get shot, or just all of a sudden the life leaves them. It's pretty hard. And so there's that initial shock of the horror of what they thought it would be, and then what it actually turned out to be. I tried to watch Flags of Our Fathers when they first came out, and I don't know why I couldn't get through it. I'm halfway through now, which is why I decided I was going to make this episode. And I can only take it in doses because it really makes you realize just how horrible war is. And that's when I began to think, that would be a good podcast episode, that good war movies are anti-war movies. But Flags of Our Fathers is a Clint Eastwood movie, and it's about Iwo Jima and the flag raising on Mount Suribachi on Iwo Jima. And I remember reading lots of stuff. I'd forgotten it. And so when I started watching the movie, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. There's all this controversy. And the fact that the picture that was published in the papers, you couldn't see any of their faces. And so that was just kind of very interesting. But when you watch these movies, Joyeux Noel, All Quiet on the Western Front, Flags of Our Fathers, even The Pacific, right, which was a miniseries made after Band of Brothers, you begin to see the waste of it all, just the destruction, the wanton destruction. Now, I'm talking to normal people here, right? I'm not talking to the sociopaths who love death, who love killing, who don't care about all of the destruction, the ruined lives, the broken families. I'm not talking to that audience. Okay, I'm talking to the people who realize that on Christmas Eve or some special other holiday, non-religious, if that's your preference, um, where would you rather be? Would you want to be in a trench, not knowing if you're going to see the next day, or with your family, the people that you love, the people that care about you? And so, to me, I think that that a good movie is not about the action, about the effects, the historical accuracy of the props, but it's supposed to send the message that you don't want to be in war. People say that Saving Private Ryan, the invasion scene in the first 10, 15 minutes of the movie, was realistic, right? So if you were in the theater and they have the surround sound going, and you hear the bullets whizzing by, that people who are actually there said that's pretty much what it sounded like. But I think if you were there, then you have your actual memories to help inform that. But if you were just watching it, you still can't grasp just how horrible it was. And I don't want to know, right? But uh, it makes me think about all of the things that people are ordered to do by their governments, right? Because back then they had the draft. Even though a lot of people volunteered, there was still a draft. If given a choice, knowing full well of what was in store for them, would they rather seek to live in peace? Now, before any of you get all crazy, I am all about self-defense, right? So don't call me, I don't know what people think a pacifist is these days, but I'm more of the non-aggression principle. So where you don't aggress first, but if someone does attack you, you're fully justified to defend yourself. But instead of trying to kill each other by their corrupt government, right? Because generally there is a lot of corruption in the governments. Wouldn't it be better to find friends, lovers, maybe among your supposed enemy? Not necessarily the other soldiers, but the people who are from that country. There's always something to learn through conversation, through dialogue. I mean, isn't that what podcasts are all about? Listening to all these different subjectivities. Joe Rogan said that's why he started, just to hear what other people had to say. There's so much damage, there's so much tragedy, and for what? For what? I mean, you think about Ukraine and Russia right now, and some of the videos that are coming out now, obviously not on the mainstream, but if you're on Twitter and um, subscribe to certain handles, you can see a lot of these videos, and it's horrible. There's no glory there. There's no place to hide even. Everything is on satellite. So you think you're dug deep into a hole of your foxhole, the satellite is watching you. And at any given moment, they can take your life. Why would anyone want that? It's just so crazy. And plus, I think I mentioned it before, the NATO strategy, US strategy is proving to be obsolete, right? The weapons are obsolete. The strategy is obsolete. Every once in a while, they'll get a victory. Okay, fine. But the Russians are basically spanking NATO all over Ukraine. So a good war movie is anti-war. Wouldn't it be better? So even if you say, oh, but all the camaraderie and teamwork of the military, sure. But you can do that by doing a project together, being on the same team in a sport or a game, having picnics together, right? I really believe that pro-war types, people are like all about, oh, yeah, we got to do it because those people are so evil. They never saw a war movie. Or perhaps they're anti-gun. And so they have no idea what happens in a war, what happens when you get shot. Maybe they only saw the propaganda films pre-Platoon, back in the 70s. But maybe they should be, encouraged to watch the movies I discussed, just so that they can see just how horrible It is to get people to start thinking like Sun Tzu, right? We have to start realizing that a lot of politicians are speaking not truth, but they're speaking the message that their donors from the military industrial complex want us to hear, so that we be deluded enough to sign up and go and try to do a good thing. Now, I just want to add a little footnote here. I do have a bunch of students who went into the military after taking my class, and I might have told you some of them even kept it a secret because they didn't want me to get upset, and it's not that at all. Students that went into the military, I told them that they have to remember the things that I said, so that when they rotate out, when they come back to life here in the United States, that they can adjust, right? So they know what they're getting into, and they know that it's not going to be what the propaganda says. And so maybe they have a hope, an ability to be able to reacclimate into regular everyday life, and maybe spend the rest of their life being anti-war. But anyway, so if anything from this episode, hopefully you have some good movie ideas or movies to watch, references anyway. All right, so I will talk to you in the next episode.